Hello everyone, Pastor George here with today's mailbag, and today's mailbag is a sobering one but a very good question. And the question is, why is suicide a sin or immoral? Does dying by assisted suicide transfer the sin and immorality to the person performing the action? So, really good question, because if you start with the Bible, if you go into the Bible and you look for something that says suicide is sinful, you're not going to find it. It's not one of those commands that has been given as this is thus saith the Lord, don't commit suicide. But one of the interesting things here is that you don't also, in any tradition out in the Abrahamic traditions, even outside of Christianity, find anyone who believes that suicide is good. So suicide actually happens in the Bible quite a few times. Several people in the Bible commit suicide, right? King Saul commits suicide. There's a commander who the Israelites fight against that commits suicide. Judas commits suicide. So it's something that happens. Jonah attempts suicide when he is thrown into the sea and is swallowed by the great fish, right? So it's something that happens and occurs in the Bible. Although it is not, none of these situations is talked about positively or being good, right? These are all things that when it happens are sad. I mean, even in the case of Saul, where he asks the guy to kill him, his sword bearer, because that's how they would do it, right? The sword bearer at first doesn't want to do it. So it's not something that is held up as a good thing, but it's something that is a part of the human life, right? And I think that that's why it's good that the Bible has it, because it doesn't shy away from it. And I actually think the Bible not presenting any positive image of it is pretty powerful, given the time period when suicide was a big part of the honor and shame culture, where it was one of the ways that you could honorably end your life if you were shamed. Take the manly way out and kill yourself, that type of thing, right? Now, of course, that just is talking about basic things, but that doesn't explain why it's immoral to commit suicide. And I think what I want to start by saying here is that I think when we define suicide, we have to define what the goal of it is, right? So sometimes when you talk about suicide, one of the things is like, so if a soldier is in a war and a grenade is thrown into, the room where he and his friends are, and he jumps on top of the grenade to kill himself but save his friends, is that suicide? No, right? Because the goal of that isn't to kill himself. The goal is to save his friends. I mean, you can use this example with Jesus. Right, Jesus goes to the cross, he dies, and he has the power to give up his life, right? He didn't have to do that, but he chooses to die in order to save other people, right? He chooses death. Is that suicide? No, because the goal isn't to die. It's simply to save others, right? So I wanted to just clarify that, because some people can be a little nitpicky about what is suicide. So I want to just define suicide real quick as just the idea or taking of one's life for the sole purpose of seeking death, right? Whether it's to escape something in this world or for any sort of mental condition or things like that, right? And I want to start by saying, I think as Christians, even though we have this very strong teaching, we always need to be very sympathetic and empathetic with people who struggle through these things. Although I think that sometimes strong pronouncements can be very helpful, it's how we do them that's also important. So the reason that suicide is sinful and immoral is because the goal of suicide is to take one's life as though it is one's life to take, right? That's why it's usually counted the same as murder, right? Because murder is the unjust taking of someone else's life, right? It's not murder if someone is brought before the court and found guilty and sentenced to the death penalty. That isn't murder. That's a just taking of someone's life. An unjust taking of someone's life is killing them for whatever reason outside of these strictures that God has set up. And if you want to see a good example of this, right, just the idea of where this comes from, in Job chapter 1, verse 21, Job is talking about God, right? He says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gives, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." This idea that only God is the one who can who can give life, and only God is the one who can take it away. This is also why Christians are very big on standing against euthanasia and things like that, self-assisted suicide, because it is not our job to take someone's life. That is God's job. I think that usually that's all that's said, and Christians don't really provide any solutions. At least this is the popular belief. I actually do know that Christian ethicists and doctors and things like that do provide solutions, but usually when you're in debates or, shouting slogans on Twitter, people don't really talk about that. I think the Christian focus for people who are going to be terminally ill should be on palliative and hospice care, keeping them comfortable and helping them live through these conditions and things like that. But the idea here is that we don't play God. We're not allowed to play God with others' lives, and we're not allowed to play God with our own life. God will take life when he wishes to. And I think that one of the things that we can is we don't have to pretend as though this is something that is in and of itself something easy, right? I mean, one of the things that I think we usually gloss over is in 2 Corinthians 1. This is Paul the Apostle talking, right? And he's talking about all the difficulties that he has. And he says this in 2 Corinthians 1:8. He says, "For we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself." Now, when we read that, right, we usually are focused on just how bad it is. But if you actually look at what Paul says there at the end, he says we despaired of life itself. I mean, that could be like that's him saying, we wanted to die, essentially, right? Maybe not by suicide, but that's how bad it was, is that they despaired of life itself. Death would have been a welcome release for Paul there. But what Paul says exactly after that, he says, "Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead." And so he ends up turning it around and saying, well, even though we felt that, we realized as we were feeling that this is something that actually helps us to put our priorities straight and in order. And we talked a little while ago about dying well, right? And how dying, the process of it, is something that we Christians should take seriously, and how we best represent Christ and represent our faith during that time. And the church, and here, right, that Paul says here, although he doesn't say it out loud, is you don't do that by just seeking out death, right? Immediate, quick to end your suffering type of thing. Rather, you go through it in order to show glory to God and to point people to Him. Of course, that is something easier said than done, but I think we can take courage and knowledge in the fact that many people, Paul being one of them, but others have gone on before. I mean, Paul is a really good example of a life condition that continually affected him. Probably something with his eyes that made it very difficult for him to see, because his writing was really bad in the sense of he couldn't write. And so I think that there was something else that affected his ability to do that. And I think if we see it that way, we realize that if he was able to do it, then and we know other Christians who are able to do it, then of course we can be bolstered to do the same thing. So that's basically a very brief introduction to that. Obviously, you could get deep into ethics and philosophy and things like that, but that is a surface level reading of why suicide is a sin and is immoral. Now, on to the second part of the question, which is also really interesting and something that is going to become a bigger issue for Christians as this becomes something that is more common. The second question was, does dying by assisted suicide transfer the sin and immorality to the person performing the action? So, of course, transfer of sin isn't a possibility, right? Like, if someone does a sinful action, it's not something that is passed on, right? This person who is seeking death for themselves is sinning by committing suicide. And as countries in the Western Europe and as some states in the United States have adopted laws that allow people to have physician-assisted suicide or assisted suicide, we start to see that this is going to become an issue for the church. And of course, this is something that has been around for a long time. It's not like the law needed to change for some doctors to assist people along in dying, right? I'm sure I haven't done any great research, but so I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was something that was common practice or uncommonly practiced, but still often enough before any of these laws were put in place. But now it's much more regimented and things like that. I want to say, I'm probably wrong on this, but I want to say about 3% of deaths in Canada were due to assisted suicide last year, which is actually a huge number. Of course, they're a really small country, though. So, yeah, but so anyway, it's going to become a big deal because it would be hard for me to imagine that in the next 10 or 20 years, New Jersey, for instance, and other states of the same political kind of persuasion wouldn't put forward assisted suicide and make it legal. It would be hard for me to imagine, but hey, I hope it doesn't happen, but it wouldn't surprise me. So what does that mean for people in the medical industry? Well, if you assist someone in doing something evil, then that's also a sin that you do, right? If you help someone do something that is sinful, that's a sin. It's not transferred from them to you, but you also do it, right? So a physician who signs off and administers these things to this person is guilty, right? A nurse who helps with it is guilty of it as well. And I could understand why some doctors or nurses would want to help, right? I mean, after all, I think the whole thing with the armor bearer for Saul was actually a really good example of this, where we have someone who he wants to assist this king that is giving him a command, but can't because he's worried that it's going to do anything, right? And some people help him, right? So like the young men who help Abimelech, who's the guy that is fighting in Judges 9. He's killed by his armor bearer, right? They think that they're doing a good thing and helping out, but in actuality, they're just participating in sin. And so I wouldn't say it transfers. That wouldn't be the word that I would use, but I would say that they are equally guilty as the person who does this. Just the same way that, if you help someone steal someone, you're still guilty of theft. Or if you help someone murder someone, you're still guilty of murder. So I think that that's probably the best place where I'll leave it there. But as always, if anyone of you is struggling with depression or with suicidal ideation, talk to people who can help. Talk to me. I will put you in contact with people. Call the National Suicide Hotline. We Christians stand for life, and we should help people. So if you have any of those questions, reach out and find people to answer them and to get the help that you need, because your life is worth living and God loves you. So that's all I have for today. I hope all of you are doing well. Thank you for the question, and I will see you guys on Sunday for worship. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and peace out.